Welcome to BAM, Badass Moms with Lori and Jenny. We are moms on a mission to share women's stories about life, fitness, aging, relationships, travel, and much more. Hello, friends, and thanks for listening. I just wanted to take a second to give you a quick reminder about subscribing to the show. If you have not already, just take a moment and do so. This will make sure that you never miss a daily bite or an upcoming episode. And in addition to that, if you have a few extra moments and like to drop us a review, we'd really appreciate it. And there's also a sponsor of the show located at the bottom of all of our episodes. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for being badass. Hello, friends, and thanks for joining us on another episode of the BAM, Badass Moms with Lori and Jenny. Today, we got the opportunity to sit down with the lovely Kristyn and talk about her journey of entrepreneurship, being a mom, going through divorce, being a blended family. She gives us so many wonderful insights to how she created a strong foundation, not only with her family, but also in her business and helping other businesses thrive by doing the same. We're so excited to have Kristyn on the show. Thank you so much. And we're looking forward to diving deeper into your story. Jenny, why don't you kick it off and tell us how you and Kristyn know each other, and then we can dive deeper.
Yes. So Kristyn and I met, I'm guessing it's been like 10 years, Kristyn. So
I think we're pretty close to it. Yeah, definitely.
We met through a mutual friend, and we were both in the HR space. And so we started chatting, and then we even got together. We both had coaching background, working with Gallup, certifications in Gallup, and then also the HR space. And so we just chatted about all things HR. We talked about coaching together. We talked about like maybe consulting together, and the stars just didn't align in that way, but we've always kept in touch. And I followed her journey. So when I saw she just started a new company, I'm super excited to hear all about it. And I wanted to get her on here and have her talk us through like all the fabulous things going on in her life.
Perfect. Kristyn, tell us about your current company and how you got there. Let's find out more.
So yes, Jenny, I think you're right. I think it is about 9 years ago, and it's just fascinating how like the things that you experience and, get exposed to, how it just leads down all these really cool paths and things connect back. Like 10 years ago, my goodness, who would have ever thought we'd be sitting here today? So I really appreciate you guys having me. And so my background is, where I'm at today is I did just launch my own company. And so how I got there, I've kind of dabbled back and forth and had this bouncing between consultant and contract work and then full-time work. And what I've found is that I often end up doing really good contract and coaching and consulting work for clients. And then they go, "Oh, you're bright and shiny and you can do so many good things here. And we want to bring you in and have you here full time." So I end up kind of doing this bounce back and forth. And so about 7 years ago or so, I had a client that I was working with doing a lot of Gallup strengths-based coaching and employee engagement work. And they were a wonderful client. I just loved working with that team. And they offered me this full-time position to join them in a VP of People and Culture position, which is where Jenny and I initially started to cross paths. And the very first week I was there, they put this book in my hand called Traction by Gino Wickman. And they go, "Hey, we want you to do this." And me and all of my doughy-eyed optimism, I'm like, yeah, I can do that. Sure. I've never met a thing that I couldn't figure out and like help people, integrate into their business. So as I read it and started going through the journey, it became apparent to me, this is basically like the one-stop shop for all of the best practices and things that I've seen work really well throughout my career, whether it was in, large international corporate organizations or small mom and pop size businesses. So did that work with them for a few years and ended up sitting in this integrator seat, which is basically this person who is, running all the parts and pieces of the business at the ground level, helping take that visionary entrepreneurial leaders picture for the business and helping them really put it into action through a lot of galvanization, enablement, and tenacity type work in the business. And I really enjoyed it. And so that led me on a journey to explore this space of fractional work, where I basically take systems, like EOS and other systems that I've seen work really well in the past. And I've essentially curated this set of tools that I can now take to a business of any kind, any size, really, any industry, and help them put it in there as like a really strong foundation. And
can you tell us sorry to interrupt, can you tell us what EOS is?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the book Traction by Gino Wickman outlines this framework of EOS, or the Entrepreneurial Operating System. So I use a lot of those tools and pieces inside of the work that I do. And where I think my cross section is, it's kind of interesting, is I know where the boundaries are inside of that system. And I also know where we can push the envelope a little bit to make it work well for the business. And so rather than being super legalistic, I'm able to remain pure to the methodology and keep the appropriate pieces in place so that we're not compromising the integrity of it. But I also know where we can flex, massage, and customize to make it right for the business, so that we get really good adoption and results out of it. So I think that's where my experience has kind of taken me over the years, and doing this now for many, many companies and hundreds of leadership team members. So I'm having a lot of fun with it. So in my new business, essentially what I'm doing is using kind of a 3-phased process, because I also last year went and got my certified exit planning advisor license. And so now I'm certified in helping companies or helping entrepreneurial leaders exit from their business as well. So at this point, we're starting with EOS as a foundation, getting those good basics in place. Then we're moving into really deepened and strengthened leadership development, because I think it's super important that we're developing better leaders inside of organizations. There's so much bad leadership out there. I know you guys are passionate about that too. Yep. So the leadership development phase is really developing that depth in the bench of the organization, right? How do we grow? We're going to need good leaders. And it's easier to do that if you've got people that embrace a leadership and management mindset in a shared fashion throughout the organization. So pushing through some of those tools as well. And then ultimately moving my clients into a more transformative mindset. And this is where I'm starting to explore this concept of a CXO, or Chief Transformation Officer. And it's been used throughout, various spaces for the past 5 to 10 years, but not really clearly defined. So my objective in the next 5 years is to clearly define the Chief Transformation Officer space and bring those fractional services to companies so that it can make bigger moves in with their goals. So
that's awesome.
And what kind of companies do you like to work with? Like, what's your ideal client?
My ideal client, industry doesn't mean very much. I can find ways to apply to basically any industry. So it's extremely industry agnostic, but there are some qualities that I find are really critical when you're going through this type of work. I am not positioned well to work with someone who is just an entrepreneurial leader and maybe in startup phase without a leadership team or without key people who could be elevated into leadership. So companies that have, in some form or fashion, some version of an established leadership team, they've got those key people who can help turn the wrench week to week inside of the business as I'm coaching with them and working with them to implement the systems and get that stood up. So people who are willing to kind of jump in, get their hands dirty, learn, really growth mindset type organizations, and people who are self-aware, right? I know Patrick Lencioni says the best type of leader to work with is a self-aware one.
Yes.
So that's really important to me too. So those are some of the more intangible qualities that I look for.
Have you always been kind of, it sounds like you've worked in corporate, but when did the entrepreneurial bug really spark for you? Like, what was it where you're like, I want to kind of do my own thing. I don't want to be, although you're, how you want to be a part of these companies and help them, but you don't necessarily want to work full-time for them.
Well, and since I've met you, you've had that bug. And I think that that's one of the things we connected on, is that you've kind of had that, how do I bring this to as many people as possible kind of thing, instead of limited to one company. So tell us about that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So I am turning into your typical serial entrepreneur. So my first company that actually kind of connected Jenny and I was a very small strengths-based leadership coaching practice. It was me. I didn't have a ton of clients. I had a couple of really great clients. And so that was about 10 years ago. And that's where, that's actually the intersection of when I went through my divorce. So when I it was the day before I was about to go to the courthouse to have my divorce finalized here in the state of Colorado. And I went to work that morning and was fired from my full-time job the day before I'm about to be legally single. Yeah. And it was like, we're so sorry. We really love you, but financially, like, we can't afford you anymore. Very, very small company, like husband and wife owner. I'm there, and they, again, oh, she's bright and shiny. Like, they met me through a personal connection. They think I can do all this great work. And then they realize, even for the very meager salary that I was being paid, and it was sad money. Like, it was really, really pathetic. And they were like, we can't afford you and you're fired and we're really sorry. And I took it more as like a layoff than a termination. It's not like I did something crazy and, got the door hitting me on the way out kind of thing. But it was a massive, massive blow.
Yeah.
So I have to walk into court the next day to have my divorce finalized and start being like officially on my own, supporting my two kids, who were, I think, like 3 and 6 at the time. My daughter had just turned 6 and my son he was a little guy. And it was terrifying.
Yeah.
And I could have obviously beat the streets, knock down my network, like kick open some doors, find a connection, get myself into another W-2 position. But there was something deep inside me that was like, nope. That is not the direction that we're going here. Like, I was tired of earning money for other people and doing what I was told. And I wanted to take all this stuff that I had compiled inside of my skill set throughout my career and like bring it to more companies. So that's where I started my strengths-based coaching business, which was a huge leap of faith. I still look back and I'm like, I can't believe you did that.
I want to hang out there for just a minute because I don't know. I mean, so I went solo in January, and I am so incredibly lucky and grateful that I not only have a business partner, but I also have a husband who is like, yeah, do it. And we planned for it and all that stuff. I can't even imagine how terrifying that was for you.
And it's funny because we look back on times in our lives and we go, wow, how did I do that?
Yeah.
How did I survive that? Yeah. And I look back now probably with a fair amount of positivity or optimism, kind of like childbirth, right? You forget how the first one was and you're like, let's have another baby. And then you're like, oh God, why did we do this? So I had some support though at the time. So I had just met my now husband.
Okay.
And he was actually the one that encouraged me. And so while I was legally single, I still had support. And there's something to be said about the support and the corners that we can look in our lives to find that. So for me at the time, my parents were not supportive of my divorce. I come from a family that's very much like, you stick it out for the kids. It doesn't matter how bad it gets, which, it's generational in a lot of ways, right? So I was not in a good place as far as familial support went. I lost a lot of friends in my divorce because so many of those people feel like they have to pick a side. I also had friends who were in bad marriages themselves. And I actually had one friend tell me just a couple years ago that the reason she distanced herself from me during that time is because she was going through severe physical abuse in her own marriage.
Oh, God.
And could not muster couldn't muster the courage to leave her husband. And yet here I was leaving mine for far less serious reasons of our own, but nothing like that. And so not a lot of support, but I did have Randy, and he was a massive believer in what I was capable of and stood behind me and supported me in all of that. I had a cousin who actually applied for a grant on my behalf as a female new startup business person and got me $2,500. That was literally a game-changing amount of money for me at the time. So these little things started to come together, and I was in a networking group at the time with a wonderful group of people. And there was a guy that did marketing, and he's like, let's go to a coffee shop. Actually, no, we sat at Tokyo Joe's in Fort Collins for 4 hours eating noodles and probably like all doped up on soy sauce and like whatever else is in their food. And we just ideated and came up with a company name and a color palette and a concept and all of these things. So it's amazing where people will come from when you open yourself up and you just kind of charge full steam ahead, like doors do open.
I think people want to help as entrepreneurs. You know, I feel like people gravitate to wanting to help you, right? Like either they've been there themselves or they have a specialty in an area that they want to share because they want to see you be successful. Because as we all know, it's not easy. It is definitely so hard and so scary. So I want to go back to the divorce situation. Your kiddos were really little, right? So here you are starting a new business, transitioning out of your relationship from their dad, kind of getting into a new relationship. It sounds like, how did that affect them? And how did it affect you trying to kind of juggle all of those things going on?
I think because they were little, you know, the level of information that they had was very different. It was very, very minor, right? Like they don't know, they know whatever we tell them and expose them to. And we could probably do an entire podcast on the dynamics between myself, my ex-husband, his new girlfriend, who was on the spot within weeks of him and I even like not living together way before that, right? So you could do a whole other podcast on codependency, but that's a whole other thing, right? So, oh gosh, I think they handled it incredibly well. And I think they still handle it incredibly well. And that doesn't mean it's been without its challenges. So my husband and I together, we were really intentional initially about exposure of our children to one another, as well as exposure of our children to each other, right? So even Randy met my kids earlier on, I would say, maybe a couple months after he and I started dating. And that said, I know that sounds fast to a lot of people. I knew I was going to marry him on our first date, and he knew the same about me. So we were like soulmates from the drop. Our lives kind of like ran parallel for many, many years. And all of a sudden we call it our divine intersection, where we just kind of cross. It's like, oh, it's you. I've been waiting for you. So I know it sounds fast, but for us, it was like we were shopping for houses on our third date. So,
and I think everybody has their own timeline. So when people are like, well, I would never do this and I would never do this, you just don't know until you're in that position. And your kids, I will say they're a little enough. They're pretty adaptable at 3 and 6. And like you said, there's challenges there, but they're fairly adaptable.
1000% they were. And for me at the time, I was living about 45 minutes from Randy. So when we ultimately, about 9-10 months later, you know, made the decision to blend our lives together completely, my kids had to move. You know, it was easier for I had the flexibility to move in my divorce agreement. So that was part of the deal. So I moved down to Denver, and my daughter had to change schools in the middle of the school year, which I know is not great, but I also know, having gone through that myself, I'm like, builds character. You're going to be fine.
Right, exactly.
And it's interesting because I can look at it all with hindsight right now. So we're about to celebrate 10 years together in January. And when we just had family dinner here at the house last night. So when we first started dating, we had kids ages 4 to 14. And now we have ages 14 to 24 almost.
Oh, that's crazy.
And think about the journey. And of course, 5 kids, all completely different in like a million ways, right? We dealt with the complexity of, you know, I had a girl and he had a girl, but neither of them had sisters. So you want to talk about like 2 little alpha females competing for attention and status and everything else. That was interesting dynamics. You know, his oldest son was in a very impressionable phase of his life. You know, being a teenager is hard. I would say that 14 was way harder than 4 with what we went through. So he had some really challenging years and had a lot of resentment. And as angry as he was at his mom and dad for their divorce, it's hard to be angry at your parents. So who do you think he was angry at?
He's angry at you.
I'm the easy target.
Right.
Like, who the hell is this
Stepmom.
lady? Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like absolutely like evil stepmomster at times. And, you know, looking back on it, there are so many things that I would do differently, but there's literally no playbook for this.
Oh, yeah.
And that was one of the big things that I found, and which is what's led me to some of the work that I do want to do moving forward outside of my business, because I tried talking to people who I knew that went through divorce. I tried going to a church group because I was like, these people must have their act together. They must know how to give me some guidance here, you know? That was like a fundamental disaster and painful experience. I was like, wow, there's some real, like, there are people here having really, really bad situations. Yeah. And I feel now like I'm not in as bad a situation. So now I feel like out of place. Like, I need a worse story to show up for this group kind of thing. So that was difficult. Like I said, I lost friends. I had people trying to convince me to stay in the marriage, like my parents. It was just really, really difficult. And so what I realized very, very quickly is no one's coming to save me. Yeah. There's no book that's going to tell me what to do. And I better figure out, as I always have, whether it's personal, professional, whatever, I better figure out how to pull myself up by my bootstraps and figure some shit out here and build the life I want. And I also knew if I can get clear on what I want my next adventure, my next chapter to look like, I can always do that. I literally do that in businesses. Yeah, I can reverse engineer into whatever outcome I'm looking for. So having Randy earlier on in that journey, we started to really like look with the end in mind. What is the life we're trying to create for one another and for our children?
So with the kiddos, you had a total of 5, as you were saying, with the blended family, correct? How did they get to a point, because they were at such varying ages, where they did build a relationship, like where they were able to kind of like, you know, live together? And that's the other question. Were, you know, both being divorced, how did you do the back and forth? Was it times when you had no kids in your home, or was it, you know, always kids in your home? I'm curious how you made that work.
So we were both going through kind of those conversations with our exes at the same time, which was interesting. So we were intentionally
now 4 adults in your relationship, right? Like
adults, grandparents, everybody wants their hands in the cookie jar on these decisions, right? Like everyone's got a voice. So we were intentionally lining up a few things. Weekends. So the way that our schedules were, like, how do we alternate our weekends the same? Because that is, by the way, the secret silver lining of divorce that no one really wants to talk about. But the fact that we had a weekend, every other weekend together, just the two of us, our ability to recharge, rejuvenate, and focus on our relationship, just the two of us, was extremely powerful and important, because we were like in a foxhole together going into battle against these little monsters. I mean, we love them dearly, but they were hard on us. Yeah. And so having that is like, I just want people who are going through divorce or feel guilty about that, your ability to invest in yourself during those quiet moments where you can just like be yourself, care for yourself, and give yourself a break does enable us to be better parents when we're with them. Yeah. And I never advocate for divorce, just to be clear. Like, I'm not one of those people like, oh, just get a divorce, no big deal. Like, I make it sound easy now, but that is not ever my stance. I'm always advocating for marriages to find a way and stay together in spite of difficult circumstances. So I think that was really helpful. We also lined up things like holidays, right? So making sure, like, how are we rotating holidays? Can we get on some kind of similar structure? Now, I will say that our exes didn't know we were like swapping notes and doing that behind the scenes, but I think they would both probably agree if I were asked to ask either one of them today. And I have exceptional relationships with both my husband's ex-wife and my ex-husband today. I think they would be appreciative. They're like, well, we're glad you thought of those things because, you know, it makes life easier for everybody.
Absolutely.
So those are some of the things that we did to train.
I want to touch on your parents really quick. So your parents, are they still married?
Yes.
So, you know, I think it's just super interesting, that pressure that you felt like like my marriage isn't working, and they've been together forever. And who knows, like maybe they've had a great marriage, maybe they haven't, but they've decided to stay together. My parents split when I was 19. And I will say that was super traumatizing for me at that age. And I also felt like they didn't ever express that they were not happy. So it was a huge surprise. So I still vividly remember when they told us, and I still was just like, I mean, I even looking back, I'm like, I still wouldn't have seen the signs. Right. And it's just so interesting because they decided to stay together for us. And I talked to both of them after the fact. And at first I was super pissed off because I was like, well, now I have no good, like, I don't know, like no good role model for a happy marriage because yours was obviously not happy and I had no idea. So that made me very angry. Of course, I was a 19-year-old teenager. So I was just angry in general, right? And my whole life changed. And it had been like super stable and, same house, same kids, same neighborhood, same school, like all the things. And then all of a sudden I felt like everything was just pulled out from under me. So again, going back to the 3 and 6, yeah, it's hard and they have this new life ahead of them, but you were open with them. You talked about your challenges. They saw what could be in your new life together. They helped co-create that. So I think that there's probably some, pros and cons to both, right? But I think that that's kind of a beautiful thing that you were just, this is what's going on. This is what we're going to do. And we're going to get through it together.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I had forgotten how old you were when your parents split up, and think about how much change you were going through.
Yeah.
Massively transformative season of your life. Yeah. But again, it goes back to the fact that there's no right or wrong answers here. No one knows what the hell they're doing.
Like, I don't say that to say they fucked up. What they did the best they could. They thought that was the right thing to do. I don't know if they would still think that today, but I mean, they were married for like probably 15 of the years they were married, and they were married 26 years. They wanted to divorce. Like that's how,
wow.
Yeah.
So you talk about resilience, right? Because, you talk about how your kids were younger, Kristyn, and Jenny, you were older, and how that was very hard for you. And then Kristyn, you talk about your now husband's kids being a little bit older and how they were just a lot harder in those teenage years, because I do think there's a lot of resent at that point, a lot of emotions that are going on in those teenage years. And I'm sure, Jenny, you experience that too, where when they're little, they're just like matter of fact. But when they're older, there's so many more emotions and, understanding the whole story and feeling like, Jenny, in your particular case, like you weren't told the truth, or you were kind of like kept on the other side. And then, all this coming about. So it's very interesting, the different phases of, ultimately, I guess if you're going to get divorced, I guess the key is do it when your kids are small.
Get it over with. No. Well, hey, and those are tough years. I mean, having little kids is hard on a marriage. And I'm not going to say that having kids did not create the challenges, that there were underlying issues. We didn't have a great foundation. So when you add kids to the mix, little kids, lots of demands, 2 careers, all of it.
Yeah.
You're really stacking the deck against yourself in a lot of ways. And we didn't have what it took. We didn't have enough of a foundation, and commonality together. So, and it's funny too, because Randy and I look back, and we were just talking about it the other day. I'm like, 10 years ago, we felt like we were like at battle together, and it felt like it was going to last forever. And here we are, down to 3 kids in the house, soon to be 2. And before you know it, we'll just have my little guy left. He's not so little. He's like 5 inches taller than me now, which is terrifying. But, you always, in the moment, it always feels like you're in this phase that's going to last forever, especially when kids are little.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how fast it really does go. But,
the years are short, the days are long. That's one of the things that I heard that I love so much. One of the things you said about like you in a marriage and in a family, like having that strong foundation. So like you and your husband having the strong foundation, and then you add kids to that, right? I think there's so much of that in business too. Like in some of the work that you're doing is helping companies build that foundation so that they can grow and they can scale, and they're, unshakable as they do that.
Oh, absolutely. All of the strategies are the same, whether it's in business or your personal life. It all kind of applies. You just have to figure out how to kind of tweak it and massage it to apply to the situation. But I just posted this morning on Instagram because my husband and I we kicked off our annual planning that we do as a couple this past weekend. And we retreat away from kids, dogs, distractions, chores, errands, like all the things. And we put ourselves in a position to truly focus 100% on one another. And we start with the end in mind. We reset what we think our life is going to look like 10 years from now, 3 years from now. And then we set our 1-year plan based on that kind of, compartmentalized approach. We give ourselves a lot of pats on the back and credit for the things we accomplished in the previous year. We do a full reset of our financial picture. And it's been game changing for us. We're going into now our 3rd year of doing that. But all I'm doing is applying the things that I do with my businesses in their annual planning sessions on a personal level. And it has changed so many things for us in so many facets in relationships and personal health and our spirituality, our finances in massive ways. I mean, huge swings in our finances and how we've attacked those goals together. And it's tough headspace to get into, because if you were to look back 10 years ago, would I ever paint the picture that I have today? I couldn't have if I tried. I would have absolutely needed the magic 8 ball or the crystal ball, to know exactly what I was in for. But there's still so much power in doing that. So those are things that I want to bring to more people too, because I think that there's so many misses. I mean, even the wildly successful people that I get to work with that own a lot of these companies, when I tell them how my husband and I, how I force my husband to geek out with me and go through this annual planning process every year. And they're like, wait, I wonder if I can get my husband to do that with me, or I wonder if I can get my wife to do that with me. Right. And now bringing it to them too. So I'm helping their business. I'm also helping their families. I've got ways that last year we started bringing our kids into it, not on the financial piece, because you still obviously keep that very separate, but even just think about these kids, right? And what are they doing all day? They're on their phones and they're like 6 inches in front of their face. They struggle even thinking about consequences of the things that they do societally, like with social media and those factors. And to sit your kids down and make them think about okay, 10 years from now, how old are you going to be?
Yeah.
Where do you think you live? What are you doing for work?
Do you have them write it down? That would be very interesting. Do you? Oh, perfect.
I do. I have them write it down. So I facilitate them through this vision experiment, basically, this activity where I'm making them think about the future. And listen, here's the thing. We are not the Brady Bunch. My kids are doing this with a little bit of kicking and screaming and making fun of me and bitching and fucking around. There's a whole lot of that happening too. But I'll tell you what. I took those sheets of paper. We did this. We went to San Diego last year as a family, first week in January. We like to do a family vacation, and it was raining, which I was like, come on, San Diego. We came from Colorado. We don't need rain. Yeah. And we sat around this gorgeous dining room table in this condo that we were in, and I had them go through this. And, their attention span is still pretty minor. But I have those little sheets of paper out of their notebooks, and they shared it. And I made them start with 10 years out, but then I also made them kind of bring it down to, I said, okay, and then 3 years from now it's starting to get real. 10 years, we can still have fun and daydream. 3 years, shit's getting real, because now, I'm in college, or, I'm about to graduate high school, right? And now that's a time frame that they can start to connect with a bit easier. And now when you take that 3 years and you say, okay, so what do you need to do between now and the end of the year to put yourself on the track to living that life that you envision for yourself 3 years from now?
So with all this great advice, Kristyn, I have a question. I know you had mentioned before we started recording, you're writing a book. And
that needs to be in the book.
I'm guessing maybe it is. I'm not sure. So can you tell our listeners what kind of book you're currently writing and what they can expect to get out of it?
Yeah. So I'll say, for everything with family vision and action planning and those exercises for both with children and with your spouse, I'm actually building courses and tool sets for that. So people will be able to consume that information and get access to that right here for planning for 2024. So I would say, if you follow me on Instagram or you want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to share that with you, because I just want to make just help one person every day, right? So glad to connect with people and give them access to those tools. On the book side of things, so I talked about how isolated I felt as a woman going through a divorce, even with a few key relationships to tether myself to. So the concept of the book is the fact that when you go through a divorce, you almost have to take on this biopic personality, because to my ex-husband, I'm now the ex-wife.
Yep.
And what is the connotation there, right? Mean ex-wife, bitchy ex-wife, nasty ex-wife, pain in the ass ex-wife, right? So to him, I represent one thing, and it's not necessarily good, even though we were as amicable as I think we could have been during such a difficult transaction. And then on the other side, I'm the next wife.
Yeah.
So for Randy, I'm the woman of his dreams. I'm the one he's been waiting for. I'm his soulmate. I represent this beautiful, angelic, wonderful, like person that he gets to spend the rest of his life with, and he adores me.
It's like this
polarity. I would say that totally,
yeah.
Right? So now here's the trick. I'm not only that, like, I have to be a certain way with my ex-husband, and then I'm a certain way with my new husband, right? So there's polarization there, and I feel like I'm this two-headed monster, not because I'm being the nasty ex-wife with my ex-husband, but when you go into a room and you know immediately like how you're perceived when you walk into a conversation or an interaction, you gear up a little bit, right? You bristle a little bit. You put your dukes up and you brace for impact.
Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas I get to be like this totally different person as the next wife with my new husband, right? Now, the sprawl of that, right? The different relationships. Now we enter like his new wife. That's a whole other podcast. And then I've got my new husband, his ex-wife, right? Now I will say, she and I have a very, very good relationship. Not so much with my ex-husband's wife, but the book is this. There is no playbook, and I'm not trying to provide one with what I want to do. But what I am doing is I'm interviewing women like myself who have been on some side of these difficult situations, these divorces, these remarriages, single life, online dating. That's a whole other episode too, because that's a nightmare. But I've got a playbook for that also. But what I do want to help is to normalize the fact that there's no right or wrong answers. You do have to do what's right for you. You have to meet your children, your ex-spouse, your new spouse, the people in your life, kind of where they're at. And I want to tell stories because I think stories help people feel not so crazy and not so alone. And so in interviewing these women, I am curating a book of stories. Think like chicken soup for the soul, right? You go like, what do I need to read about today? And so it's going to be organized kind of by some high level themes, but stories of women like you and me and everyone else who have done things right, wrong, good, bad, who have massively fucked things up and wish they could start all over, and do things differently. And people who are like, hey, I did this thing. I think it kind of worked. Maybe it'll work for you. Not a book about psychology, not a book about having the perfect blended family, right?
Right.
Because those books didn't help me very much, just like the support groups didn't. But my hope is that this normalizes things for people. And if even one woman out there says, oh, I don't feel so alone right now, then I've accomplished it. So it should be fun and entertaining, but then also probably heartbreaking and painful and maybe, I don't know, maybe some tears in there and all of it.
It's human. Well, and I think Lori and I think we can resonate with this because the reason we wanted to start this is because we feel like there isn't storytelling anymore. There isn't people sharing their real feelings. And, like being a badass mom it's fucking hard. And there's like amazing times and there's really hard times. And people don't talk enough about the hard times. You see the shiny Instagram fun times, but digging into some of those, like, hey, I didn't know if I was going to make it out of that. And I think that that's the kind of stuff we need to share so that we don't feel alone.
Completely. I love that you guys are doing this.
It's everybody has their story, right? And I think exactly what you said about your book, like, although some of those stories may not resonate exactly with the readers, they can understand and they can process, like, I'm not alone, even though my story is different. And like Jenny said, as moms, we all experience that. We all have kids of different ages, families of different sizes. But at the end of the day, we're a mom, and we're juggling so many things. So I think it's just getting voices out there and letting you know you're not alone, right? So I think it's fascinating. I can't wait to read it. So let's talk about some fun stuff. Not that divorce and, all that isn't fun. But so what do you like to do in your spare time? How do you disconnect? What do you like to do to kind of keep your sanity? You're very busy being, an entrepreneur and a mom, but what do you like to do for you?
I think that's a really interesting question because what I find myself doing a lot in my spare time right now is actually building the foundation for my new business. So I think that's a huge indicator light for people with an entrepreneurial heart and spirit. When you want to spend your additional, discretionary time working on your business, that's a huge sign that you're on the right track. Even if it's uncomfortable and it's hard for you to buckle down and do the work and you're doing things that you don't have the total picture and plan for, being energized by that work is where I think you find that intersection of like, oh, I'm on the right track. So I'm spending a lot of time on that right now, trying to figure out how to make social media posts that are not cringy, according to my kid. She's how I figure that out, by the way. I'm like, hey, take a look at this 16-year-old. Like, is it good? What do you think? Like, would your friends like it? Like, that matters. But, is it dumb? And that's the litmus test apparently these days for me. But so I'll sit and watch football with my husband yesterday, and I'm working on my, my post for this morning to go out for that. Other things that we love to do, I have 2 daughters who play golf. We play golf as a family all the time. I play golf poorly, and the rest of my family does pretty good. Super proud of my stepdaughter. She was just offered a roster spot for a school out in California to play next year and go to school there. So she hasn't made that decision yet, but just super proud parenting moment there. And
so she's senior?
Yeah. She is. Yes.
Okay. So you've got one senior.
Got one senior, a junior, and then my son will be a freshman next year.
Oh my gosh.
That's a lot.
The other 2 are out of the house.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say we had the kids over for dinner last night, and, now they have like boyfriends and girlfriends and things. And so our family's growing. I have 10 stockings on my fireplace this year. I was like, we're going to need more command hooks because the dogs also need stockings and, the boyfriends and girlfriends and stuff. So it's been a lot of fun. But I will say, just staying focused on these kids throughout and making sure that we've always kept them as the priority, their little hearts. And I think back about the journaling I did 10 years ago and where we wanted to be in the next 10 years. My husband's oldest son, about 2 years ago, actually sent me a text message and apologized for everything that he had done to cause trouble in our household. And he started to acknowledge, I was blaming you and I was mad. I wasn't mad at you, but I just pointed my anger at you.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry. And I hope you'll be able to forgive me and move forward. And I try and say this without crying, but I was like, I have forgiven you 100 times and I'll forgive you as many times as I need to, because it was never your fault.
Yeah.
You were a kid. You're still a kid. And of course I forgive you. Of course I love you. We've started over 1 million times and we'll start over as many more as we need to keep building this relationship. And we are family. And now, he leaves and he says, I love you. And he gives me big hugs when he leaves. And he's going to be 24 years old in February. So
he just had to grow up. He just had to grow up. And that's a clear sign right there. He is now, to a point, somewhat grown up and realized how his actions might that you had feelings too. He just now realized you had feelings too. And he is addressing those. So I think
I don't think they know that until they're probably in their 20s. I mean, there's things that I now know that I'm like, oh my God, my parents, I think maybe 5-10 years ago, I was like, oh, my parents did the best they could. Shocker. I had no idea.
That's powerful, Jenny. That moment as an adult where you look back and you realize my parents are not these people that I've put on a pedestal. They are doing the best they can with what they've got. Yeah. They did what they thought was best. They are flawed, broken people, just like the rest of us, facing tremendous challenges. How can I not extend grace to them now as an adult going through my set of challenges. And that was huge for me when I finally had that realization as an adult. It was very, very powerful. That, and I think just kind of allowing yourself to rewrite that story and change that and look back and say, it's not that my parents were this or that, right? This is the gift inside of my experience with these people as my parents.
Yeah.
And I'm doing a lot of work on that and like the rewriting my childhood stories to reframe and understand, because your history can literally be whatever you choose for it to be and put whatever lens on it you want.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at finding the gifts in some of those childhood stories and approaching them with a bit more humor and grace than I have in the past.
It's a lifelong journey.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Kristyn, so do you have any, you have a lot of advice and like I said, I'm really looking forward to reading your book when it comes out. But if you could look back and just give, one, maybe it's a sentence or maybe it's just a concept, like what would some advice be to maybe moms that are, going through a divorce, that are struggling and having just an extremely hard time, or, people that are entrepreneurs and their business isn't taking off as fast as they'd like it to, any good words of wisdom?
Speaking to people going through divorce, I think that's the audience that I would like to just give some encouragement to. When I was pregnant with my daughter, so going way back, I remember I was working in a business with a lot of women at the time. I remember all the older ladies that would come in, they would say, all you have to do is love them. Just love them. When they show up, don't worry about anything else. You're going to screw stuff up. You're not going to know all the answers. Just love them. And when I was like 25 and I'm like, okay, right? Like, duh, of course I'm going to love them. But in going through my divorce, if there are things that I would have done differently, it's probably this. I would have picked my battles a lot differently, specifically with my ex-husband, and even the battles I felt I was fighting with my husband on his behalf with his ex-wife. There are so many stupid shit things that we got wrapped around the axle about that literally make no difference today. I used to keep notes because I was like, oh, I'm writing a book one day. I'm going to tell it all, right? And I had all of these examples of like my ex-husband and his girlfriend, now wife, being assholes, or my husband's ex-wife doing something selfish, stupid, whatever. And I'm like, I'm going to write all these things down and keep track. And then I was like, what am I doing? Like, that's so ridiculous. It was cathartic for me.
Yeah.
But pick your battles, because 10 years goes fast.
Yeah.
And just love those kids through it and stay close to them. And love and grace. So much love and grace for yourself, for your children. And frankly, I look at my ex-husband with tremendous grace these days.
Yeah.
For the things I put him through, the things we went through, all of it. So
everybody does a lot of growing up, right? Even when you are an adult. Right?
Yeah.
You hope so.
Exactly.
The best ones do.
Awesome. Well, Kristyn, thank you so much for sharing your story. I mean, obviously you are a badass mom and you're a badass entrepreneur, and we will put all the information that tells people how to get a hold of you for their companies, or if they want to reach out to you about the book you're writing. We really appreciate having you on the show.
And she has
awesome.
a beautiful aesthetic. Like, the Instagram is absolutely stunning. All of your pictures.
Well, her 16-year-old daughter helps her, Jenny.
I know.
Come on.
Is she for hire?
I know.
But yeah, I highly recommend following. Just beautiful, beautiful work. So thank you.
You're sweet. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening, friends. And until next time, keep being you and keep being badass.